Holt had left, I think, on a blackboard in Leeds when he gave a presentation in July of 1994. I don't know exactly how accurate it is, but Mark was quite a good artist, so I imagine it's close to the truth. And I think there again it supports other testimony. Next, please. And we've already seen that one, so we can forget that one. That's not unclear. How many of you are aware of the so-called Amicizia case? 1, 2, possibly 3? Right. This is, I would say, the most extraordinary case I have ever investigated. It's full of farcical situations, totally incredible situations, but I am convinced it is valid. The amicizia is the Italian word for friendship, which was the name given by those involved here on this planet and those aliens based on this planet who were working with various individuals and groups actually all over the world at the time, starting in 1956. And they abbreviated the name of the group as W56. And I've met several of the people associated with it. In particular, Stefano Breccia, who I would say one of the most extraordinary human beings I've met in my life. He's a scientist. He's lectured to the Soviet Academy of Sciences on his scientific speciality, which is fractal analysis. He's very, very well connected. He's a former pilot, a quite remarkable and modest man who has provided me with a tremendous amount of information, not in his book, about the technology of alien craft. He himself has travelled in one of these craft. He's taken photographs of them close up. He's been in quite a number, as a matter of fact. He had hundreds of contacts and conversations with various types of aliens living and working among us in some cases. The whole saga of the Amicizia case spans a period of about 40 years, involving large groups of people in many countries such as Argentina, Austria, Chile, France, Germany, Italy, Siberia, and Switzerland. One of the earliest of the contact people selected by this Amicizia group was Professor Bruno Sammarchicha, a respected Catholic scholar. Let's have a look, see if we've got some photographs of some of the people involved now. Aliens infiltrate Italy. Next. Here are some of the people involved with the Amicizia group. This is Bruno Sammarchicha, the Catholic scholar. There were several military people involved and some people from the police and the armed forces, people from all walks of life, as you'll be hearing. And as Stefano said, all of us were moved by the deep morality and sincere humanity on the part of the aliens. These were people who simply could not imagine doing any evil to anyone, who liked eating well, drinking, even smoking, who enjoyed playing the violin, in one case, and tennis, as well as driving luxury cars and executive airplanes. They lived most of the time in their huge underground bases, but some of them lived among us inside our society. One was a university researcher, another the manager of a rather important textile company in Italy, and a third was the senior manager of one of the largest German telecommunications company. We're talking about aliens here. It was the aliens' decision to keep everything secret, and those involved were sworn to secrecy. Some of the humans involved were handpicked by the aliens, and they were not cranks. I mentioned Professor Breccia, an expert in artificial intelligence and computer sciences. It also involved some 20 engineers, an archaeologist, accountants, an expert in military logistics, bank employees, 2 members of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, 5 university professors, a court of assizes judge, the executive vice president of one of the largest multinational companies in the world, and 2 future Nobel Prize laureates. 4 generals, but only a few politicians. Politicians generally, I think, don't come under great favour regarding aliens. Next slide, please. That's Bruno Sammartino on the right with, I think, a cardinal, a high-ranking cardinal in the Catholic Church. A lot of information was getting passed on to the highest levels in the Vatican at the time, some of whom, I'm including 1 or 2 popes themselves, had actual contacts. Next. This is Paolo di Girolamo, who I met, a very distinguished artist and cartoonist in Rome. Delightful man. He never actually had any encounters with the aliens per se, but he had plenty of experiences to convince him that extraordinary things were going on. Stefano and others were allowed to record conversations. There are recorded conversations with some of these aliens. There are photographs of a few of them. I'm going to show you a couple shortly. Next. This was Bruno Ghibaldi, a very distinguished aerospace journalist in Italy at the time. And he was very deeply moved by his experiences with the aliens over a very, very long period of time. Next. This is a great Italian painter. I think he's still alive. I've yet to be able to meet him yet, and his name is Gaspare da Lama. And you'll see some of his photographs, 1 or 2 of his photographs later. Next. This is Stefano Breccia as a young man at the time that he was initiated into the Amicizia saga. And after, I think, some 30, 40 years he left, he says, you know, I was teaching at university, there's only a certain amount of time you can spend with aliens. Next. That's a picture my girlfriend took a couple of years ago in Chieti, where he lived at the time. As I say, certainly one of the most remarkable men I've met in my life. And very sadly and prematurely, he died last March. A great loss to the subject, but thank heavens, not before having completed another book, Amicizia, 50 years later, which I was hoping would be published by Nexus, but I believe they've turned it down now, so I'm going to certainly do what I can to get that book published, because Stefano's gave me a lot of information from that book, which I shall be publishing in my next book. I mean, for the first time ever, exact, precise details of alien technology and types of craft and their phenomenally advanced technology. Next. That's the typical Adamski bell, as they call them. And these are descriptions by Stefano about some of the craft, with a great deal more information than that included. Next. And these are the more commonly used types by the Amicizia group, the W56 group. And I'll be showing you a few photographs of those. Next one. This was taken by Gaspare Dell'Arma, the artist I mentioned earlier, in Milan. Next. Stefano Breccia took this one. He took many of these craft. These ones are relatively small. They're no more than about 12 feet in diameter. Next. These are all enlargements. Some of the, when they're reduced in size, they're quite sharp. Next, please. Thank you. I think that was the final one in a series taken by Stefano, not far from Chieti in Italy. Here we have an alleged alien, not so unusual, you might think. Some of them are very similar. But let's just have a look at the next one. Okay. How tall do you think this guy is? 8 foot? 10 is the closest so far. He was certainly quite over 9 foot tall. And I'm going to show you, this is a genuine photograph. It was taken by Bruno Sammartino, a very respected Catholic historian and scholar who's written dozens and dozens of books on Catholic history and so forth. And this was taken in Monte Silvano in Italy in 1976, Stefano told me, by Bruno Sammartino. And is this the real deal, or just an incredible hunk? Several people have passed various interesting observations. Some have said, oh, the poor chap has lost an arm. I assure you he hadn't. Anyway, there's a very fine lady in Florence. I met her, and she's provided a lot of information which ascertained the precise height of this guy. Next, please. By measuring, knowing the time of year the picture was taken, and knowing the exact length of these, I guess it's a fir tree, is it, would you say, or a pine? Fir? Pine? Help. Pine, thank you very much. And also by knowing the distance from this guy to railings just behind this pine tree here, they were able to sort out all sorts of things. Next, please. 3 meters, 7 centimeters in height was the estimate. And I think that's pretty accurate. Now, they weren't all like that. Some of them were quite small. I'm not talking about little grey buggers. I'm talking about, there are small aliens, I mean, and there's so much information. I mean, this guy, for example, he said, many of us lived to 400 years of age. It was quite common, others not so long. The bases were very huge, as you'll hear in a minute. And in fact, a number, including Stefano, was taken to bases periodically. I mean, they've got quite used to it. And the way they construct the bases is quite extraordinary. They have the technology to create huge spaces by simply reducing the matter, whether it's rock, in this case it usually is for the underground and undersea bases, some of which are huge. And when they leave them, they're no use for them. They can just fill the whole lot in again with the same rock. There's none of this. There's no excavating material or anything. It's done in a very, very short space of time. And given that they're thousands of years ahead of us technologically, it's no big deal for them at all. And quite a few of those involved with the Amicizia group were taken to these bases periodically. The largest was 186 miles long, 62 miles in width, and nearly 1,000-foot ceiling. There were children there. You call them children, but they said that from the description they looked like very young adults. Beautiful women. Other bases much smaller, and they could create a base in minutes. When Stefano was living in Milan, he told me, they were able to create a base underneath his flat where they had regular meetings. And there were a lot of instances like this. The problem they were having, the reason for this increase in intervention on Earth was because there are other groups that have been on this Earth for a long time, just as these guys have, coming and going. They're not limited. Going to another star system even is an afternoon trip for them probably. But they were well aware of two other groups. Certainly one was called the Contraries, CTR for short, and these were trying to wreck everything the Amicizia group was trying to do, and there were some very frightening episodes. There were also encounters with biological robots, very, very sophisticated biological robots. They also taught a great deal of our technology to people, and they have passed on that technology, and it is in use today, just as it is in many other countries where these groups have been giving us new technology since the 1950s. Why? Because they need our help in dealing with the opposition, if you like. There is a vested interest in planet Earth by several different species, and it is a very serious problem. I have been told by several government people that the alien situation is the most important problem facing mankind on Earth. Many others have a vested interest in this planet. Why? Apparently it is actually unique in this neck of the woods, not in the galaxy, obviously, but in this part of the galaxy, it is unique, they have said, and there are many other planets like it, but they have infiltrated here and are using all sorts of, they're helping us in many, many different ways, technology being one of them. Stefano told me that about 8 or 10 Italian Air Force pilots had been trained to fly their craft, which, so Stefano told me, are a great deal easier to fly than any of ours. In fact, when Stefano went on a trip, he told me he found it quite boring compared to flying planes, which he was an avid pilot. So it really is an extraordinary saga, covering, as I say, 40 years, and not just in Italy. They require a little more oxygen than we do. They live a great deal longer, as I said earlier. Their liver is, I believe, a little smaller than ours. They require a little sleep. Mating is exactly the same as here, though often artificial insemination is used. They speak many languages, and there are recordings of them available, including them speaking Sanskrit, because they were coming here in the days when the Hindu Vedas, which a lot of those were sacred hymns written in Sanskrit. But there's caution here. Stefano wisely cautions us not to take the whole story at face value. Too many people have died during this history, he says, even those foreign to it. Too many people went mad and too many have ruined their life. So that's just an introduction to the amicizia subject, which I find absolutely fascinating, and it's to me it's very, very real. And if it were not for the fact that Stefano was such a great guy, and I would have trusted my life with him, so would other people, I would have been very, very sceptical. Anyway, let's just move on a little bit. So you don't think we have giants? There's one of ours, as far as I know. Next. And this is a house that Samaciccia, the Catholic historian, was directed to build by the aliens themselves as a type of introduction and training college for a lot of our people on this planet. Next. There's just a few more of the people at Samaciccia. I don't know who these people are, but they were involved in the W56 Amicizia group. Now, for something completely different. We've heard a lot about the Rendlesham landing. There have been several other dramatic landings, equally dramatic, in some cases more dramatic landings in the United Kingdom than are generally recognised. 17th of July 1955, Margaret Fry, who I've known since about 1974, she's a well-known Welsh UFO researcher. She and her doctor and one of her small sons were going to the clinic, the doctor's clinic, because the son was suffering from a very high temperature. And suddenly, everything got dark, the car engine started spluttering and finally came to a halt, and then this came out of the sky. She said it was a hat-shaped craft about 30 feet in diameter. Within seconds, she said, it spun, tilted on its side and gently flopped to the ground at the crossroads in front of us. This was in Bexley Heath. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Bexley Heath. It's rather an average type of London suburb. Not the kind of place associated with the landing of flying saucers. Now, there was a group of a dozen children playing just beside this while it was going on, and they were all absolutely shocked and terrified. Some of them ran home. Others, instead of panicking, just rushed closer to see what the hell this thing was. As Margaret told me, the object had no lights, but had 4 portholes that were closed. It stayed there for about 5 minutes before it took off, again in a wobbly fashion, similar to a falling leaf. About 100 feet up, it stopped momentarily and one porthole opened. For the first time, I thought there were people on board. There were several police witnesses at the time, and then the most extraordinary thing developed. Unknown to Margaret at the time, another landing took place about 250, 300 yards away, or in Bexley Heath. And this was observed by over 100 witnesses, many of whom have testified, including police. And this one witness, for example, said it took up this other craft. I think I'll be able to show you a picture of one of a sketch. I think it's the next picture. That's Margaret Fry. And that is a sketch of the second craft. And these were described as they looked like suckers. When they came down, they actually let down at one stage when it came down to land. Had about 8 massive landing pads. The witnesses, John Maynard, one of the witnesses, didn't actually touch the ground. The centre was still, but the outer rim was spinning slowly, and it had white lights flashing like a camera flash. It had what looked like windows, but the glass was concave and moulded together, so you could not see in. A couple of us then went forward, tried to touch it, and it began to spin faster, then lifted slowly, tilting slightly, and hovered above their heads. Then it moved slowly until it was above Beadenwell Primary School for about a minute before shooting off into the sky. Now, there were Ministry of Defence, afterwards police, questioning the children and telling people not to discuss the subject. People say, well, why weren't any photographs taken? This was 1955, not that many. A few people had box cameras and things, but not that many people had cameras. And I think when you're taken by surprise like that, sometimes, you know, you forget to rush in and get cameras in case the thing had gone. Next, please. There was a landing in February of 2010, reported by one man and his dog. And later, another witness with a dog came forward the next day. This was just, I think, the day or two afterwards, a press photograph of this guy, Roy Shaw, and his hound, who in the small hours were absolutely terrified by the sight of a 100-foot diameter disc which landed in the public park in Exmouth in Devon. And I find this a very convincing case. Next picture. There's the sketch by Roy Shaw of the craft. So there have been other landings in the United Kingdom, and that is the latest one that I'm aware of, 2010 in Exmouth. So, disclosure. Ladies and gentlemen, well, I'm not going to delay much further because I want to now really introduce a question and answer session. I don't know, how long have I been talking for? 3/4 of an hour. We don't want to go on